Hello and welcome to In the Court of Wenton Knave. We're doing all of Zappa. We've got to Frank Zappa meets the Mothers of Prevention. A significant moment in his career, I think, because it's very, very politically motivated. It was around this time or a few months before that the PMRC, the Parents Musical Resource Centre, I think it's called, which is an organisation most significantly associated with inventor of the internet and hunter of man-bear-pig, Al Gore. His wife was a major part of this, basically lobbying government to instigate a lot of censorship on music and music videos and things like that. So a sort of real sort of Mary Whitehouse kind of organisation, but with very sinister links with government, which was wholly inappropriate. And obviously Frank would pick up on this, particularly because she's attacking music. They had a big publicity campaign and made up a list of the Filthy 15, which is this disgusting 15 songs, and it's the most pathetic list of songs, things like Eat Me Alive by Judas Priest. I mean, if you're offended by that, then just go and hide in a cupboard. You'll be fine. So thus, this led to a hearing, which is available on YouTube. I assume it's public domain. Probably legally has to be public domain, I imagine, due to American laws, probably much to the sorrow of these extremely authoritarian politicians involved who made, now in retrospect, made fools of themselves. I'm sure they didn't think that at the time. And Frank actually got to say his bit in front of the committee and made it very clear about what he thought of the idea of this kind of censorship and forcing record companies to censor things or cover things up and things like that. And he made the sort of ultimate point that, you know, people who make bad laws are much more dangerous than people who celebrate sexuality. It's the old story about, you know, that how many people have died from the Karma Sutra, how many people have died from the Bible. There's no comparison. And he also made the rather extreme remark that, you know, how long before a letter J is applied to Jewish records by force. And now that's a very emotive thing to say, but there's a valid point with that, you know, that's where it ends up. If you do believe it's the thin end of the wedge, that's where it ends up. There was some talk of it being like the secret 60s blacklists of radio stations. So there were secret blacklists in the 60s in American radio stations. I don't know anything about that, but it sounds like a bit of a conspiracy theory, but something that's been covered up, because apparently whenever anyone mentioned it on the TV, it wasn't included in the broadcast and stuff like this, so don't know what's going on there. There was one moment during the hearing where Frank kind of owned this old fart who shouldn't have really been there. He shouldn't have been in a position of passing judgment over art. He's deeply offended. Don't understand the Constitution and can't tell the difference between public action and private action. And the implication was that, oh no, this is private action. We're talking about voluntary action by nothing to do with the government. And Frank's response was, is this private action? And of course it isn't. This is undemocratic government wives putting pressure on businesses to censor, which is politically unpalatable, unless you're into that sort of thing. I don't know. So he hastily put together an album of bits and pieces. So it is a bits and pieces album. There's one track which is to do with that hearing, and because it's public domain, he could actually use the sounds from it, and that's the highlight of it, which I'll talk about in a bit. Strangely, there was a European version of this album released which didn't include it, because he thought, well, it's American politics, they're not interested in that. So that album would have been much less, but they got an extra couple of tracks which weren't on the American version. So you got two different versions with different stuff on, which is always a problem. But fortunately, with various remasters, I think this is the 2012 one, but I think it was fixed before that. All the tracks were put on together. It does mean the track list is a bit confused, so what you get on the CD isn't necessarily what you rip. So when you rip it, you may come out with a different track list, and maybe on iTunes you might get something different as well. But never mind. The album opens with one of the weaker tracks on there, strangely. I Don't Even Care. Vocals by Johnny Guitar Watson, which is nice, but I think in the end Ray White's better, to be honest. But it's okay. Vocals are very high in the mix though again, and the band's very low, and I'm not really into that, as I've said before. Track 2 is One Man, One Vote. I suppose these synclavier tracks, they're kind of a preview to Jazz from Hell, which we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks, which was a big deal. This is quite an accessible piece by Frank's synclavier standards. There's nothing impossible. It's just a nice electronic piece. The next track though, Little Beige Sambo. This is much less accessible in a sense, but also much better and much more likeable for Zappa fans. You've got mental, impossible marimba going on. Stuff that maybe even Ruth Underwood couldn't play. I think what's significant about these synclavier tracks and what Jazz from Hell is it's much more rhythmic than some of the stuff on Perfect Stranger. Whether that's because he's got used to using it, or whether he just wanted to go in that direction, I'm not sure. Track 4 is Aerobics in Bondage. I'm assuming somewhere in there is the theme from Penguin in Bondage, and I think there is. But it does sound like aerobics as well. That's why it's Aerobics in Bondage. That sort of 80s sound, which obviously has aged spectacularly badly. But I think in context it's okay, and I think certainly in the case of Jazz from Hell, the music is so good, it's okay. You know, maybe it would be nice if it was recorded now I tend to prefer the ensemble modern versions of those tracks, because I prefer the sound of orchestra rather than electronic stuff, but I don't know. Track 5, We're Turning Again, and this is a really good song, I think. Turn, turn, we're turning again. The lyrics are having a go at sort of 60s retro. I don't think it's actually having a go at the 60s as much as having a go at people who think, by this point people were thinking of the 60s as this great wonderful time of happiness. So he's going on about how it's just idiots taking drugs and stuff like that, which is obviously a very typical Zappa thing. Track 6, Alien Orifice, a highlight of the album. Excellent jazzy theme. The version on Make a Jazz Noise here is better, but still, brilliant track, one of the highlights. Then we got Yo Cats. I have talked before about how Frank's sort of funny satirical world became serious satirical and sort of bitter and cutting, and this is definitely that, in that it's quite nasty in a way. But it makes me laugh. It's funny. Yo Cats are sort of elite session musicians who take all the jobs for session musicians and don't let anyone else in, sort of play the game and have no soul. You know, and deliberately let the session run too long so they get the overtime and they get more money. So they've got loads of money and don't have any life at all. I mean, that's a great performance from Ike Willis, actually. A lot of that is down to Ike, I think, in his performance. It's funny and it's good. Track 8, What's New in Baltimore. This is the first time we get to hear What's New in Baltimore. This is the instrumental version of it. I think this is a bit of classic Zappa, actually. You've got the very complex intro and then into the really melodic What's New in Baltimore. This is the instrumental version, though, so there's no vocals. We get a live version on the next album, which does have vocals on it, so that's okay. Which brings us on to track 9. This is the big one, Porn Wars it's called. This is the title track about the hearing and reason for the whole album existing. It's kind of like the Chrome plays in Megaphone of Destiny in that it is music concrete. It's using the sounds of people's voices and things and making music out of it. I think it's underrated. I think it is one of his masterpieces of using different sounds to make something completely different. It's a brilliant 12-minute piece of work. Fantastic. There were a lot of different little phrases that people came out with at this hearing, and he so effectively shows how ridiculous these people are. There's someone saying fire and chains and outrageous filth. Such a great expression, so he did use that later on. And also the guy saying maybe I could be a good rock star, which is used over and over again, to not to make them sound ridiculous, but just to show how ridiculous these phrases are. These are things they said. Seriously. You've also got the sycophantic Al Gore saying about, oh no, hey Frank, yay, I like you, I'm a big fan of yours. I'm down with the kids. Shut up, Al. And there's also bits of Lumpy Gravy on there. There's a little bit in the middle of something from Thingfish, actually. But in this context, it works fantastically well. And this is what I said about Thingfish, is that if you had bits of that with something else, it would have worked fine. You know, my problem with Thingfish is that it's just 2 albums of it, which is too much. There's another phrase that if I could do away constitutionally with it, I would. In other words, he doesn't really believe in the Constitution, only when it suits him. So the back cover is the Constitution going through a grinder. Brilliant piece of music. You don't have to understand it politically to appreciate the sounds of it as a piece of music. An angry, heavy piece of music. Brilliant. Can't recommend it enough. Track 10 is HR 2911. HR 2911 was a bill. The idea was to impose a blank tape tax to help the industry to stop home tapers. And that never went through. But Frank pointed out if that had passed, a lot of money would have been generated, which probably could have funded the solution to this censorship problem, putting the lyrics on the albums, because someone would have to pay for that. That was the problem with that. It's heavy, scary sounds. I mean, this is a great use of the synclavity, and the sounds they use can't be reproduced. It's not just that it's very fast. It's just textures of sound that can't be reproduced without a computer. So that's brilliant. An interesting album. I mean, I like it. I suspect it's not considered much of a classic, but I really like it. Not just the Porn Wars title track. You know, I'd put it above Them and Us, definitely, but which it is the sequel to. Probably better than Drowning Witch as well. You know, maybe I don't like it quite as much as Man from Utopia, but it's a good album. See you next time.